Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to
Dice in Mind.
So we just got through our 100th episode, which was awesome.
Awesome.
But we got to keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And who we have on today, we
Yeah,
keep saying this, but
I know.
Why
do any of these people spend their time talking to us? Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So we're going to have Scott Fitzgerald Gray on with us today. Yeah. And Scott has had his hands in D&D. He started playing back in the AD&D days, first and second edition. He's had his hands in deeply. In 3, 5, 4,
and 5,
and now 5th edition.
Yep.
He caught what made you all googly-eyed was that
this is so cool.
He headed up the book for Acquisitions Incorporated.
Yeah. Which is my absolute favorite D&D guide.
Yeah, and it is, and as you'll hear us say, it's such a well done book. Mm-hmm. And Scott talks about it. It was the book that they wanted to produce.
Right. And they were able to do it.
And they were able to do it.
To their liking, without as many, maybe limitations, I think. And I don't mean that in a negative way. But they had so much control over it. And he'll explain it. But
he'll explain it much better than we could.
It's a wonderful, wonderful guide.
And the other thing is, he's developed and he's developing the Core 20 role-playing system and Core 20 mechanic, which is a derivative, and he'll explain, because I ask about it, he'll explain the connections with OGL and everything,
but with some truly unique, attractive features.
Yes. And obviously you'll hear it when he references Traveler, which has kind of been,
we both lit up. Should have seen your face.
Oh yeah, I was so excited because excuse me, the idea of leveling and everything like that, the take he has on that and how he's adjusted the Core 20 system for it. I am really excited for the public play test for this, because I really want to dig into it. And this is definitely one of those books, because he's already said he's going to publish it. This one's going to go on my shelf, just because I could see this at some point being a D20 system that you and I would get a real kick out of playing, just because of how he's designed, in effect, life and career paths for characters. I'm
honestly more impressed than anything that you are going to make an exception this time and pre-order and immediately buy a gaming book.
Yeah, because that happens so seldomly.
Seldom. It's good of you to break that mold.
Yeah, seldom. That's just really
you know
unusual
what? To your credit, at least to my knowledge, it has been multiple episodes since you have actually bought anything online while we're recording.
Yeah, I haven't, because obviously I'm trying to be
a little more responsible.
A little more responsible. And obviously, with a couple other books that I've purchased, I need to, I had some stuff on pre-order.
Right, I was going to say, there's still stuff coming.
And so and we have so much stuff going on.
And you and I recently, not that, just as this drops, just like not even 3 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, kind of audited our respective gaming bookshelves.
Yes.
And sold or gave away those books which we just never played and we weren't going to.
Yeah, and a lot of them were source books for games that we may or may not play. I kept the core rule book, but I've kept my first edition and second edition reprints of AD&D. I don't have much in 3.0. I have some 3.5 stuff that I've kept. Don't have much 4.0 just because I wasn't around during 4.0.
Right.
And then I kept a certain slab of my 5.0 stuff, including Acquisitions Incorporated. And the 3 core books, Players, Monsters.
All of which Scott had a heavy hand in. So we should just go over.
Let's go.
It's so interesting. Scott Fitzgerald Gray has been flogging his imagination professionally since deciding he wanted to be a writer and abandoning any hope of a real career in about the 4th grade. The time since has seen him indulge in educational forays in science, arts, and film, and the bewildering variety of occupations that have driven his search for the secret of the human condition include information systems specialist, multimedia developer, teacher, facilitator, journalist, production manager, editor, graphic designer, and logger.
So we were just before we hit record. I showed my ignorance of geography north of the border, and Scott, our guest, Scott Fitzgerald Gray, was actually showing or trying to visualize for me where they are, and that's just a gorgeous area. I would love to get up there someday. So, Scott, thank you for the lesson, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. Awesome to be here.
You are a novelist, an editor, writer, gamer, and that's oversimplification of everything that you've got going on. Kind of an overarching broad question. What got you down this road of maybe first gaming and then writing, or maybe writing then gaming, however it kind of played out for you?
Yeah, it's a very long story. I mean, that is actually a good summary kind of my life, honestly.
Well done.
And I'm incredibly fortunate to be doing what I'm doing. I'm incredibly lucky to have been able to do it for as long as I've been doing it. I've been gaming since the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Started playing D&D when I was in high school. I'm of that particular age. AD&D first edition was kind of my game when it came out. Worked in publishing for quite a long time when I got through university. Originally did a lot of computer science. That was sort of what I was intending to go into, and sort of took a side trek into publishing at one point. So wound up doing a lot of print publishing, worked for newspapers, worked for magazines, did a lot of book stuff, and then wound up in 2004 doing freelance editing for Wizards of the Coast on D&D 3.5 edition. And that was just a weird sort of happy accident, like an interesting set of circumstances that sort of led me there. And I've just been kind of just whacking away at that ever since, just continuing to do editing, doing writing and design on the game side. I edit fiction as well, other people's fiction. I write a little bit of my own fiction. I don't do as much anymore, but I used to do a fair bit of consulting and reading for film, doing sort of like story editing for screenplays. Film studios, film production companies, film development agencies, that sort of thing. Haven't done as much of that recently, just because I've been busy enough with the gaming stuff that's sort of taken first focus. And I enjoy that to the extent that if I have the opportunity to work on that, I'll happily do nothing else. Yeah.
But you were even a gamer too. I think we kind of briefly hit on it before we hit record. You were gaming AD&D when you were young. And that's kind of so Wizards wasn't kind of one of those things you fell into.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was one of those weird situations where you do something all your life and you have no real conception that there's anything you can do marketable with that. And then suddenly you realize, hey, wait a minute. Like I'd been gaming for much of my life up to a point, and I've been working in publishing for much of my life up to a point. And at some point in late 2003, I realized, hey, I could actually combine these two things, because people do this professionally. I mean, my ignorance of the industry when I first started out was astronomical. There were so many things I didn't know. I didn't know that Wizards of the Coast or places like that actually worked with freelance editors. I assumed that they had all their people in-house. I knew they did freelance design, but I was sort of I was writing screenplays at that point in time, and I had enough stuff going on for my sort of trying to occupy my writing time. So I didn't really think, I'll take a shot at being a game designer or an adventure writer. But discovering that they were looking for freelance editors, which happened totally by accident. There was a wonderful, wonderful editor named Sue Wainland, who used to work for TSR way back in the day. At the point in time that I started working for Wizards, she was running a publishing company called Malhavoc Press. It did a lot of amazing third edition stuff. And I was reading her blog because I loved reading her blog. She was a very interesting person. And she said she'd heard through the grapevine that Wizards of the Coast was looking for freelance editors, and that anybody interested should drop a line to Chris Perkins. So I dropped a line to Chris Perkins. I said, this is who I am. This is what I do. Here's my resume, lots of publishing stuff on it. And Chris, wonderful person that he is, did three of the biggest professional favors anyone's ever done for me. The first favor that he did was he emailed me back to say, actually, Sue was a tiny bit incorrect. And it's actually Kim Mohan, who was the managing editor at the time, who was looking at resumes for freelance stuff, right? Which was great of him to do. The second thing he did was to say, don't bother contacting Kim. I've already forwarded your stuff to him, and I've explained based on my reading of it who you are, and that he's someone you should, that I'm someone he should look at, which was wonderful. He then did the third and biggest favor, in which he said, Kim is extremely busy, so you're going to have to harass him continuously in order for him to get back to you. Which was great, because I'm absolutely one of those people who, if I email you twice and I don't hear back, I assume you don't want anything to do with it.
That's right.
Yep.
Right. And
Yep.
and it was the third or fourth email to Kim that he finally got back to me and said, yeah, I have your stuff here. So Kim sent me an editing test, which was a fiendishly difficult collection of pages. It was hard copy. So we had to mark it up in proofreaders marks that people used to use at newspapers.
Yeah.
Younger listeners, ask your parents what a newspaper was. So that's
so true.
Yeah. At that point, even at that point, this is mid 2000s, that was a skill set that not a lot of people had.
Right.
Because newspaper and magazine publishing had been online for so long at that point that it was sort of, it was a little bit of a lost art. So I knew how to do that. Did the test. Kim was impressed with the results, and the first assignment that I got just at the very beginning of 2004 was the 3.5 book Complete Arcane.
Wow.
Where I got to work with Kim Mohan and Chris Youngs, I think, was the lead editor on that. And then they liked what I did, and I just have been keeping at it ever since. So.
Okay, so fast. Go ahead, Brett.
No, go right ahead.
I was just gonna say, just fast forward for a moment. We'll come back to your work on 5e. Right. One doesn't even have to do a deep dive. So just like scrolling at your site, is there any 5e you have not been heavily involved with?
In truth, yes. I'm at the same. I've worked on about half the books that have been out for 5e kind of up to now. Sort of. I think with the new books that are coming out this year, with Big Bees and with the Planescape book, I think I will probably slip below 50% because I'm not working on any Wizards of the Coast stuff right now. But it's still it's a number that I have trouble believing. I was doing another podcast with a friend of mine some time ago, and he made the comment, "Oh, Scott's worked on half the stuff for 5e," and I thought that can't possibly be true. So I looked it up, and it was absolutely true, and it astounded me.
And the big half,
for a lot of things, I mean, I was very fortunate enough. I'm so lucky to have been asked to work on the core books, because that was something. It was honestly a bit of a surprise. I worked on D&D through 3.5, through all the way through 4th edition. Worked on the original 4e stuff. Worked during the 4e Essentials era, sort of towards the tail end of the line. And for 4th edition, all of the core book stuff had been done in-house, right? I got to work on 4th edition pretty much as soon as 4th edition was announced. I was working on adventures, and I was working on follow-ups. I got to write one of the first 4e adventures that appeared in Dungeon Magazine, which was a really cool piece that I quite still love, called Heathen. It was an adaptation of, it was an adventure adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which was the same source material that got turned into Apocalypse Now. So that was a lot of fun to work on. So I was working on a lot of 4th edition as soon as 4th edition was announced, but I didn't work on the core books. And for 5th edition, I honestly assumed they were probably going to be doing the same thing. All the core stuff, they got great people in-house, they'll be working on that. So I was surprised when I got an email from Greg Bilsland, who was one of the executive producers at that point in time, one of the people I worked with most closely while he was at the company. Really great guy. And he said, "We would like you to edit the Monster Manual." Wow. So I edited the Monster Manual for 5th edition, which is to say the flavor text. The amazing Chris Sims, editor and developer, who was in-house at that time, worked on the mechanics and the stat block side of things.
I can't imagine how anyone edits stat blocks for an entire book.
It's tough, and it takes someone like Chris, who's so exceptionally good at what he does, to be able to do a job like that. It really does. I got to edit about half of the Dungeon Master's Guide as well. And then I was one of the many, many people doing sort of proofreading and a final look on the Player's Handbook, which was edited by Michelle Carter, another amazing editor.
Incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
just that just it's such a corpus. I mean, there's so many of these books and they've been so influential. And like we had mentioned right before we hit record, I know Brad is too, but I am particularly partial to Acquisitions Incorporated.
Yeah.
Their source book. It's just I think I like if anything, because of this podcast, I feel like I've become a little bit of an editing and printing snob because like we've learned so much about how the sausage is made from these people, wonderful people like you who talk about it. And the Ack Inc. book, it's just so well done in every way.
Thank
And
you.
then I find it hilarious. So
Yeah.
it's such a gem. It's so unique.
Yeah.
And this is, I never followed it other outside of the game, outside of the book. So for me, this
Right.
is it, and I just love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful book. It's one of the one of my favorite things that I've worked on in RPGs, absolutely in the top 3, top 4.
Mhm.
And was also one of the best experiences that I've had working on a book. It was a lot of work. It wasn't an easy experience by any stretch of the imagination.
Mhm.
Had some great people working on it, and everybody working on the book gave like 150%,
Mhm.
to try to make it as good as it could possibly be. But at the end of the day, it really was the book that we wanted it to be. It was a great relationship because for that book, I was managing editor in that book. I was co-creative director. I did some writing for it. I did some of the editing for it alongside,
Yeah.
coincidentally, Chris Sims and Michelle Carter, who I just mentioned as working on the core books. They were the 2 editors on that book. Both did an amazing job. Teos Abadi and Sean Merwin were the lead writers on that book. 2 amazing people, friends of mine for years now. But we were all working for Penny Arcade.
Mhm.
It's Wizards of the Coast book, and they were doing the book in conjunction with Wizards of the Coast. It was like a
Right.
partnership, right?
Right.
And it was a wonderful arrangement because we got to make use of all of the resources that Wizards could give us,
Yeah.
right, in terms of their incredible development team and sort of their oversight and sort of the things that they could tell us about. Here's what you need to do in order to make this book as good as it can
Yep.
possibly be. And then they let us make the book as good as it could possibly be. So
Nice.
there was stuff in there that absolutely I don't think would have appeared if it had been a Wizards of the Coast book.
Okay.
But because we were working on it at Penny Arcade, it was a separate thing. They had just
Right.
enough distance where they could say, yeah, you know what? Go for it. Do that. We're okay with this. And the result was something that was very, very unique.
I mean, it truly is. I keep looking over. I mean, we're audio only, but like Scott, I keep looking over because it's right there on the shelf.
Yeah.
The did that freedom, that access, did that contribute to why this was such an absorbing project? Why this is such a busy project compared to other books?
For me, definitely, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting working as a freelance editor for Wizards because I've only ever been a freelancer for them. I've never worked in the office. I've never been an employee. And it's an interesting process because you're a very important part of a very complex machine.
Mhm.
Working as a freelancer, whether it's a freelance
Yeah.
designer, freelance editor, the amazing freelancers who do much of the art for the D&D books, right?
Mhm.
Everybody's kind of working independently, and you're working with people who kind of coordinate everyone's efforts. But you always kind of feel like you have the opportunity to do your best work, right? But at some point, somebody else sort of takes charge of things and makes sure that everything fits in the way that
Sure.
that it has to fit.
Yeah.
One really basic example is books. I mean, this isn't just a Wizards of the Coast thing. This is most RPG books. A lot of RPG books, most RPG books, I suspect, are written longer than they turn out, right? Because it's
Interesting.
easier
Okay.
to cut good copy down into really good copy
Absolutely.
than it is to say we don't have enough good copy to fill this book. What are we going to do?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
That's the situation nobody wants to be in. Right. So
Right.
for the Ack Inc. book, because we were the ones who were in charge of that, we were we were able to very, very closely figure out what we needed and make sure that everything that we wanted to write was in the book. Right. There were a small number of things that kind of fell by the wayside for space.
Mhm.
And for sort of content, we thought, well, we've done this here. We don't need to do this other thing as well. We can set that
Fair.
aside.
Yep.
But for the most part, the book that we put out with the Ack Inc. book was exactly the book that we had envisioned.
Nice.
The book that Teos and Sean were working on the project actually even before I came in. So Teos, Sean, Alyssa, and Jerry were the ones who were the initial concepting, talking about what the book could be. Then they brought me in to sort of coordinate things and and then we just sort of ran with it from there. But the book that came out was exactly the book that everyone had been envisioning. It was exactly the book we wanted it to be, and that's a really cool feeling because that doesn't always happen.
That's really cool. So, of course, you've written a ton beyond just quote unquote RPGs.
I have, yeah.
I mean,
Um,
in all of
yeah,
your free time?
I don't have any free time. That's
Right.
actually part of the problem. I'm the luckiest person in the world. Okay.
That's
all
cool.
of my complaints are complaints that so many people around me, so many
Yeah.
of my friends, the people that I work with would love to have. My primary problem in terms of work is I have so much, I work so much for other people that I don't have as much time as I would like to work on my own stuff.
Okay.
And even within that, I mean, it gets better / worse in terms of that being a complaint about my life, because the work that I'm doing is it's almost exclusively 100% with people I really want to work with.
Yeah.
People who are friends of mine,
Lovely.
people whose talent I greatly admire, and I just so much want to be a part of what they're doing. So they reach out to me, or I reach out to them, and I get to work on stuff with them, and it's amazing. And then at the end of the day, I go, I'm too tired and I have no time. I have to go to bed now, and I just don't have time to work on my own stuff. I've read some novels. I have other novels that are partly started and partly finished that I really want to complete.
Yeah.
I've got even gaming projects, my own stuff. I've got a ton of ideas for adventures and things that I really want to put out. And it's always a struggle to try to find the time to work on those to slot them in around other stuff that I'm doing for other people. So,
speaking of the gaming thing, just because it's something you've been talking about too on Twitter and all that, Core 20.
Core 20, yeah. Core 20 is another big thing right now. I have to find more time to work on. Core 20 is a new game that I'm going to be putting out. Going to be putting it out in a playtest this year. I'm hoping by September, because everything in it is it's very, very close to finally coming together. It's a very cool game. It's a game that I've been working on and playing for over 10 years now, but not working on in the sense that, I sit down and I put 10 hours or 20 hours a week into it. It started off, it's a version of D&D. It's a D20 based fantasy game, which has no classes and no levels. Okay. So it's built around the idea of totally free-form character building, where you can go in and you can select sort of pieces of the heroic fantasy puzzle for your character. You can decide exactly what you want your character to be, right? Which is antithetical to what D&D is. D&D has always been an archetypal game of fantasy,
right?
And that's one of the great strengths of D&D. I'm not knocking them. I love D&D. I love 5th edition. I think 5th edition is absolutely the best version of D&D that's ever been released. It's absolutely the most idealized form of what the game could be.
Yep.
But at the time that I started playing D&D way back in the 80s, the second game I started playing was Traveller, the science fiction.
There it is.
And
I was going to ask you. I'm glad you brought it up.
Oh yeah. And one of the things about Traveller, anyone who's played it knows Traveller has no classes. Traveller has effectively very free-form character building. You can select stuff from all sorts of different areas of your background and your military service, because that's sort of the default, the way Traveller works, right? And so I loved D&D. I loved AD&D when I started playing. I loved Traveller when I started playing it. And I thought to myself, back in the 80s, literally back in the 80s, wouldn't it be great if somebody wrote a version of D&D that was more like Traveller, where it was just sort of free-form stuff? You didn't have any classes and levels.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself at that time, quite honestly, oh, somebody's going to do that. I can hardly wait to play it. And so I waited for someone else to do this, and they didn't do it. So I waited a little more, and I waited a little bit more, and finally, I said, you know what, screw it. At this point, I should do this myself. So Core 20 started out as just a selection of house rules for a 3.5 campaign that I was playing. Even into this was in the 4th edition year. 4th edition had come out, but I was playing a campaign with some friends of mine. 2 of the friends I started gaming with way back in high school, who are still in my game today, which is pretty cool. And so I just had this idea. I said, hey, I got this idea for something I'd like to try. Do you want to just, turn our campaign into this and test it out? And they were like, yeah, this sounds great. So the first version of Core 20 was effectively just a set of rules saying, okay, here's a bunch of class features, right, from the existing class setup, and here's how you can take them independently of the class. All right, here's how we're going to break them down. And so we played with that for a while and had a great time. So I started adding stuff to it, and then I added a little more to it. And it was always just something I worked on kind of in my spare time, always still thinking, well, somebody else is going to do this at some point.
Right.
I don't want to put too much effort into this, because I'll end up playing someone else's really cool classless D&D game sooner or later. And eventually got to the point where I realized, okay, I've probably done more work on this than anybody else is going to do. So I might as well just actually turn it into an actual system. And so that's been the progress over the last probably 3 or 4 years, just sort of fine tuning it and doing extra development. We're kind of into like the 6th edition of the rules right now, and we've been playing it for this long. It's sort of been in what you'd call, I guess, closed alpha playtesting, because I've had different folks playing it. Everybody who plays it seems to enjoy it, seems to like it. So I'm hoping that's a good sign. I want to get the playtest out this year, and then hopefully look to do something with it, some sort of official publishing thing in 2024, ideally early 2024.
Nobody dies during character creation, right?
Not yet.
Oh, good answer.
No,
Good answer.
no one dies in character creation. It's character creation at this point is all just free form. You choose what you want to do, but you can choose within certain parameters. If you know the system, right? If you've played Core 20 a few times, you can just sit down and just build a character piecemeal. You can say, I'm going to take this, flip through different sections of the book. I want this because I want a little bit of magic. I want this because that's the combat style I want to focus on. If you don't know the system, that's a little bit daunting. So the character creation rules as they stand now, and which will be coming out in the playtest, set up different paths that one can take. So you can start out with an archetypal build, and you can say, okay, you're just going to select the following features, and your starting character is ready, right? So if you're playing a warrior archetype, you've got a bunch of combat stuff, you've got a bunch of stuff for defense, a bunch of stuff for your hit points, right? And you're basically ready to go. And it's effectively the same as building a 5th edition fighter, right? If you want to play an arcanist, then you pick the following things, and you've got your spells, and you're also ready to go. And then there's a third path, which is you can select sort of groups of features, where you say, okay, I want to choose this for fighting, and I'm going to use this. I'll use like 5 of my available 20 features when I'm starting. And this is going to give me all the combat stuff I want. Then I'm going to pick this for spell use. So I'm going to build sort of, like an archetypal 1st edition AD&D fighter magic user, right? And then you can also, in addition to all that, everything is entirely flexible. Once you get things set up, if you decide you don't like something, you can just swap it out. It works with the idea that when we learn things, it's very easy to unlearn them. So if you decide you want to take a particular path, like if you want to say, I think my combat focused character is going to be very, very sneaky. I'm going to take sneak attack, right? That's sort of our archetypal rogue thing. And I'm going to be really good at hiding. And you play a few sessions and you realize, actually, my character, the personality of this person really needs to be in front more. I'm not taking advantage of this hiding stuff as much as I would like to. You can just retrain that, and you can swap that old stuff out for something new, right? Basically, mimicking the effect of what people like me do, where I learn stuff and then I forget about it immediately after I stop using it.
Yeah.
Right. So there's
So
many things
pointing at myself. Yep.
Yeah. So many things I used to know how to do in my life that I can't do anymore. So I think that the game is realistic in that regard.
So 2 questions with that.
Yeah.
So you're going into playtest. Your goal is to actually like publish this like in book form then?
Yeah. I mean, the goal is to publish the game, and the game absolutely will be published. In the worst case scenario, where we get people play testing it, and a bunch of people like it, but there's not enough people liking it that I can look at it and say, if we do a big Kickstarter for this, it probably won't go as far as I need it to go. Then I'm absolutely going to release it just as a game, and it'll be a hobbyist thing, and people can play it, and that'll be great, and I'll be very happy with that because I think people will enjoy it. If we can get enough interest going during the playtest, then yeah, I absolutely want to see it put out as a series of books. I mean, the game at this point, I've been working at it long enough that it definitely needs additional rounds of editing. It's going to need additional development. The thing I would like most to do with it is just to make it look beautiful.
Yeah.
To make it look like a great game, a game where the art and the graphic design kind of suggests to you the type of heroic fantasy that I really want the game to be. So we'll see what happens with that between the fall of this year and the winter and early spring of next year.
It's something that's been on my radar for a while, because and you explained it really well, is this idea. And I was going to ask you about the without it. I'm glad you said traveler, because I was like, it kind of
Yeah.
feels like where I don't have to be a fighter, I don't have to be a wizard,
Exactly, yeah.
I don't have to be a cleric. I can be a person I can be a character who over time has learned these skills and is from a D&D perspective, a mishmash.
Yeah.
Did and again, it may not have had any effect. Did the situation with the OGL and everything, all that hype and craziness that went on with all of that, did that affect anything related to your game?
It did. I mean, it didn't in the sense that I'm not worried about moving forward with the game. It threw a big wrench into it. I literally announced the game, I think, in December. December was the first post I put out, and I did the first sort of design and development blog update saying, hey, here's what the game is. Here's a first look at some stuff. I'm going to be doing regular posts talking about it. And the OGL thing hit literally 3 weeks later out of nowhere. And I was like, well, I don't know what I'm doing right now. I don't know what to do going forward. I took a really hard look at the game because, I mean, the game started out built around the core, which is in some way kind of where the name of the game came from, of the 3.5 version of the game. It has since absorbed / stolen a lot of stuff from 5th edition as well, because I love a lot of what 5th edition is doing, right? But I started out during 3.5 because the game predates 5th edition by a number of years. And I actually went through and said, okay, how much is still left of the original 3.5 SRD text? And if push comes to shove, and if things go as badly as it looked like they might have gone at that point in time in January, how much work is it going to be to just rewrite the stuff here so that this game is basically clean?
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been very much. So I had that sort of in my back pocket. I was thinking this is going to take some extra time, but it definitely would have been doable. I mean, that's something that folks are doing even now with the 5th edition SRD, even though the 5th edition SRD is in Creative Commons and it's eminently usable, and it being in Creative Commons, there's nothing anyone can do to take it away at this point, which is wonderful. I think that was a really bold and very, very impressive move on Wizards' part. Level Up 5e, for example, have just gone through the process, I think, where they're saying, yeah, we want to just do another pass on what we're doing here to make sure that it's not dependent on the SRD in any way. Pathfinder, of course, is doing its own thing to cut out the last vestiges of the 3.5 SRD, which Pathfinder 2nd edition inherited through Pathfinder 1st edition.
Right. So
the changes that they've been making, lots of folks are talking about it because it's a pretty big scope of what they've chose to do with their reboots of the current books. It ultimately didn't affect my plans, though, and I think my second blog post after the first blog post where I said, "Oh, I'm so excited to be here and announcing this game." The second one was, "I'm going to put this game out even if I'm not allowed to." So we'll just sort of take it from there. Thankfully, not long after that. Yeah, thankfully, not long after that, it turned out I'm technically allowed to. But it'll be interesting. I would love to see Wizards put the 3.5 SRD into Creative Commons, which is something they have talked about doing, because it means that I can put my game out and say I'm using these 2 SRDs, both Creative Commons, as opposed to having one Creative Commons and then one OGL, because the existing OGL is back, it's back and it's not going anywhere as far as anyone knows. But it would be nice just to sort of have one sort of place to hang all this stuff on.
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated here because Chase, neither of us have any leg in the game. We watch this from the outside, but when we talk to, which he's got, people can't see it because we're a podcast, but you got the coolest.
It's a great mug. Yeah.
It's the D&D.
This is the black D&D mug with the red ampersand.
Yeah,
beautiful,
highly coveted.
But I'm always interested to hear from like people who are doing this development, like from your perspective, how that affected, because we don't. So we're watching this.
It didn't affect me directly a lot. It affected me. It affected me a lot insofar as a lot of people that I love and respect and have worked with, or even people I've never worked with, but hope to work with someday. They really took a bad hit. A lot of people just kind of looked at the OGL thing, and even before it was resolved, just said, "I think I'm done." And that was so frustrating and so sad to see. Somebody pointed out the NE Awards, which were just announced a few weeks ago now. A couple of people pointed out, there's a not insignificant number of publishers on this list with great products who aren't in business anymore. because they were publishers who had stuff out last year, did great books that are worthy of nomination and absolutely worthy of winning these awards, right? And they just said, I don't think I can do this anymore, right? I mean, the RPG business is so small to begin with,
Yeah.
right? And it's always very much a labor of love, and everyone who's working in it needs to be very careful that they don't, that labor of love thing doesn't become an excuse for doing work that's undervalued. And that's a huge topic of conversation, probably too broad to go into just sort of in a general chat. But yeah, it's very easy for people for one tiny little wrinkle like that, right? Just even the possibility that somebody's business model is going to be disrupted to some extent, or they're going to have to deal with an extra level of headache in terms of, I need to report how much money I'm making to another company in order to continue doing what I do. And for a lot of people, it was enough to just say, I'm not doing that. Right? I was doing this because of the creative freedom that the OGL gave me.
Right.
And I feel like there's an element of betrayal there. I think is how a lot of people took it. And very rightfully so.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I've been watching your stuff on Core 20, but I think with what happened, and again, I don't, neither of us have a leg in the game. I think there's obviously attention now paid towards companies that do have these fantasy realm games that they can play that are different.
Yeah.
And they're looking for those smaller publishers and all that. And that's what Core 20 really drew my attention to. Not only the, yeah.
And also, I mean, to that point, just to add that before you respond, that the courtesy of, shall we call it a kerfuffle, for lack of a better way, of the explosive growth in attention that afforded to all of these smaller and or indie publishers who otherwise wouldn't have gotten traction because people weren't actively looking for alternatives.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, one of the most interesting things that's come out of the OGL debacle, which is the word I usually use when I'm talking about it, is just the fact of how many we have different 5th edition games coming out right now, which is an astounding development. Right, Level Up 5e predated the OGL thing. That was EN Publishing's take on 5th edition. Right, it was sort of like an updated, an advanced set of rules built around 5e, but still fully compatible with 5e. It wasn't like 5e hypersonic or anything like that.
Yeah,
you can still play with both. I know people who are playing stock 5e, but they love the Level Up monster book. So they're using monsters from Level Up in their regular 5e games, and they're fully compatible, right? But we got Level Up 5e, Cobalt Press doing Tales of the Valiant, which they announced. I think I was one of those people who, when they announced it so closely on the heels of the OGL announcement, the initial OGL announcement where they said we're reauthorizing the OGL and there's going to be some changes and there's a new sheriff in town. I was one of the many people who were like, oh, okay, they're saying they've been working on this game for a long time, but I'm wondering if that's true. And I apologize to them on that because it's clearly, obviously true. Like they've gotten the playtest book out and the alpha version out so quickly. This is something clearly they were working on for a long time. Clearly another labor of love project.
Right.
Saying, hey, we love 5e, but we'd like to do some stuff a little bit differently.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be cool if we took this approach?
Yep.
Cubicle 7 has said that they're going to do their own 5e compatible game. I haven't heard much about that recently, but I think that's still a going concern. So you're in a weird position now where literally by next year, if you're a person who says, I love 5th edition D&D, someone could ask you which of the 5 versions of 5th edition D&D do you prefer to play? Which is your favorite? Right? Yeah. Because you're going to have people who are playing Level Up. You're going to have people who are playing Tales of the Valiant. You're going to have people who are playing the 2024 game. You're going to have people who are sticking with the 2014 game. Everybody's going to have their own preferred form of the type of 5e that they love to play, which I think is an amazing development. I hope that it leads to a conclusion where it helps grow the hobby.
Right.
I think there's a chance that, I think there's a chance that it does the opposite. But just in terms of having a smaller, more pieces of pie, but the pie plate stays the same, right? So the number of people who are playing Tales of the Valiant, the number of people who are playing Level Up may not be robust enough to turn those games into a real thriving gaming ecosystem and a real thriving community of players. but I don't think that's likely. It seems more likely that the excitement of having different ways to play D&D, different ways to play 5e fantasy, different ways to play D20 based games, I think will be a good thing, because I think it will probably expose more people to the possibilities of what the games can do, and especially if games like Tales of the Valiant do things a little bit differently. So if you have players who are like, I played 5e and it didn't quite grab me because it doesn't do X the way I like my fantasy games to do. Somebody else can say, well, if you like X, have a look at this, right? And I think that there's a huge potential there that I hope comes to. I hope it turns out as well as I and a lot of people want it.
Yeah,
just for those that are listening. So, if they're interested, and I'm not wrapping this up right yet, although we want to be cognizant of your time. If they're interested in Core 20, they can follow you on Twitter. You have a website for it, correct?
There's I'm on Twitter, I'm on Mastodon, Dice Camp, and I'm on Blue Sky, all as Scott F. Gray. So I'm pretty easy to find there. I also have there's a design and development blog for Core 20, which is at core20rpg.com.
Yep.
So you can go there, and that's got just sort of updates and previews. I did a preview this morning, I think. Talking about the spellcasting and magic setup. So looking at the ways that characters can choose to take on magical power, channel magical power themselves. And there's the traditional paths of spellcasting, but there's also some slightly different ways that you can take that approach as well. So like talking about like in standard D&D, you can say I want to play a cleric, I want to play a druid, I want to play a wizard or a sorcerer or a warlock. There are even more options than that in Core 20, because there are different ways to play a cleric. There are different ways to play a druid, different ways to play an arcanist. Even more so than just saying I'm going to choose a different subclass, which gives me a slightly different focus, right? You can choose to play someone who loves to have the widest range of spells possible, but doesn't need to cast them all 15 times a day. You can play someone who's just like, I have these 4 spells that I'm really good at and I really like, and I'm gonna not waste any resources learning new spells. I'm gonna simply put all those resources into casting these spells as effectively and as potently as I possibly can.
That's cool.
Right?
So as we do start to head toward the end here, then a question might be totally unfair. So fair warning.
No problem.
If you were going to draw up a PC,
right,
play in Core 20, given I warned you, given how you're building this, so obviously there's little insider information here, but if it's out in the wild, it's done. At least 1.0 is done, and it's like, all right, Scott, we're gonna run your game. You want to play, at least tonight. What would you draw up? Who would you want to play?
I can say just to lead off, the best part of that dream is actually finding someone else to run a game for me, because I am a forever DM.
I kind of figured.
I would love to. I would very much love to see that scenario come out. I would probably. I have a fondness from the AD&D days. I have a fondness for the absolute most optimal multi-class, which was the elf fighter magic user thief. If you were playing an elf, that was the one you tried to play because you could do so much. The downside was you leveled up never, because in AD&D, if you were playing a multi-classed character, your experience got divided evenly between the 3 classes. So while your other single-class characters were going up to 3rd level, you'd still be slugging along as a 1-1-1. And then you would creep up to a 1-2-1 and then a 1-2-2. So it was fun to play at the outset, but there was very slow advancement. But I love that archetype. I always have. So that might be something I would try to rebuild, because I don't think of all the characters that I've run in my games, I don't think anyone's quite done that particular archetype before, and I love that archetype, so I would love to do that. The other thing I would do is definitely do an unusual magic user. There's systems in the game where if you don't want to be a spellcaster, you can instead simply learn certain spells as innate abilities. So you're a person who just, something happened when you were a child, or you touched a magical relic that you found in the dug up in the barn or something like that.
Right.
And you can now cast, for example, like a spell like Lesser Dimension Door 3 times a day, right? So it's your one magical thing, and you just think to yourself, there's so many things that so many other types of characters I could feed into. If I want to play like a second story type rogue, right, I can go in and out of any building automatically unless it's magically warded, right, in a way that most other people cannot. Right. If I want to play a fighter, I can reposition myself on the battlefield in ways that my enemies cannot predict. I mean, and certainly, I mean, there's 5e builds that do that, right? If you're playing like a fighter type who's got Misty Step and that sort of thing, you know, this isn't novel, but it's something that Core 20 really lends itself to. Just thinking to yourself, here's a cool ability, but more so than just, you know, here's a cool thing I can do. What are the other cool things I can springboard off of with this? Because there's so much potential.
Boy, I'm glad I asked that question. That's fascinating. The movie potential is huge. I mean, just listening to that, every one of those examples would be, okay, that would be a great movie. Especially like if we were going back to like, say, the mid to late 80s and the protagonist was a teenager. We would have all been all over that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Hey, you know, as we wrap up here, thank you so much for taking the time. We didn't even touch on
so interesting.
Half the topics. We'd love to have you back at some point. Like we were talking about some of the philosophical discussions about, you know, about the industry. I would love to get your take on that.
I would absolutely love to be back anytime at all.
Thank you. Plan on it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So again, we'll put in the show notes for those that are listening to check out Core 20, check out Scott on Twitter and Mastodon and some of the other social media locations. Obviously you know, your books are available out on Amazon, you know, some of the novels and everything that you wrote. So again, thank you so much for everything and for all the work you've done, because we as consumers have enjoyed it.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
We definitely just alone, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us, and we definitely we
will have you back,
because the idea, the philosophy and the philosophical implications of licensing and everything like that. Having been involved with so many editions of gaming systems, you know, what's funny is that I had to look up while we were talking. I think most of it happened before we hit record. Just the idea of where he's located up in BC, British Columbia. And we didn't get a chance, Scott. We were going to, you mentioned this, talk about logging. That would have been cool, you know.
I don't know how we missed that one. But again, we would love to have you back. And like you said, Brad, and like what we talked about, the three of us off air afterwards, there's so much philosophically to discuss, and you and I were rookies around this because we're so new to the industry, but Scott has such a deep wealth of familiarity within and adjacent to you know, Wizards and these others, that would make for just a really interesting, I think, topically current discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can go out to just Amazon alone and see all the different books that have his name attached to them, independent of even his D&D stuff, the novels and everything that he has written. He is up there with one of the more prolific writers that we've talked with in our time here. And we've been very lucky. I mean, let's be honest. All the people that we've been talking to that have been writers, and we talk about this in many extents in our 100th episode. But just the amount of writers,
and editing,
and
all of these things,
So Scott, thank you so much. Hey, so as we head over to the GM corner, why don't you go first? What's been going on with you on that end?
So I'm thinking about our recent interviews and a number of our just offline discussions around gaming in the past couple months now. Maybe this sounds silly. I think we are both being inextricably pulled toward an inevitable experience with Traveler. It's not going to come soon because we just don't have the time. We're focused on the podcast. We're focused on the interviews. We're focused on our writing for Star Trek New Voyages, right, on TikTok. And we're loving it. But at some point, sooner than later, we have to address this on the podcast. We have to reach out to people involved with Traveler, and you and I have to spend some time together in the game, in the books. I think they're just, I'm convinced of that after these recent interviews over the past month or two. There are just so many threads that keep us just coming back to it in passing.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had Matthew on from Mongoose,
and that's huge, of course. Yep.
Yeah, I would love at some point to have Mark Miller on, who is the father of Traveler,
right?
And the creator of Traveler 5, which is a 3-book, in effect, encyclopedia of Traveler. Right. And ironically, I haven't told you this, but they're out on Drive-Thru RPG. This is the book that
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I picked up the facsimile version of the first 3 books. And
that's cool.
Did it in Drive-Thru RPG. I did it print. So
nice.
I still am fascinated by the idea that it was so not on our radar because we were still dipping our toes in.
Yeah.
And we love Trek's tops. We love Star Wars, but
love D&D.
Love D&D, but there is a grittiness with Traveler that I think we could leverage with our Moonbase project down the road.
Oh, yes. Right. Like this is one to think about along with like Modern Age and some of the others of just okay, how do you give it a real feel? And like you said not too long ago, something that has a bit more crunch.
Yeah.
That would allow us to leverage that.
And what's nice about Traveler is that it's modular. You can have it as crunchy or as simple as you want. Glass Cannon did a season playing Traveler, and I think you mentioned to me, I missed it, that they're going to do a second season with it.
That's my understanding.
But yeah, and I think I've mentioned on here, and I've told you, that's a 2024 project for us.
Yes, exactly right. Yep.
Just because we're coming to the end of the year, school starts for you, a lot going on. But I foresee us, I'm looking over at my Traveler shelf along with my Traveler 2300 and even Twilight 2000, which was another game that Games Workshop did. I see us getting into that at some point. Just because we've talked about it. High fantasy is still of interest. Fantasy Age 2nd edition is kind of the game we've been talking about with our friends at Green Ronin. But sci-fi is still our first love when it comes to gaming.
Yeah. So much is going on.
Sorry, I hijacked your.
No, you didn't. This is exactly it. So, like, I think with that, we should end it. Let everybody take a breather. We will be back as always in 2 weeks, and then with the arrival of October, somehow, we're going to talk to some pretty neat scholars about some pretty neat scholarship. Pew pew. That's all we're going to say. Be well, stay well. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.